Yeah, I think I would say you're absolutely right to be focused on the long term, because I mean the population projections do suggest that compliance with the court order could be a long-term problem that you're going to have to figure out a way to address. I don't know that we have any kind of easy solutions for you. It's a very difficult problem. I think the basic options that you have are, do you decrease the number of people coming into prison through sentencing reform? And that's a policy discussion you need to have about what's appropriate sentences for individuals. You could also invest in, as you heard from the previous panel, different types of programs that have been demonstrated with I think a growing body of research across the country to reduce recidivism, potentially reduce the people from coming to prison in the first place. Those are longer-term solutions, so that that can take years, and it's not money in the bank. You can't guarantee that there's going to end up being results at the end of the day. Those programs have to be implemented effectively to work, and there's a question mark in terms of how well they could be implemented. So that's an option. And then, of course, there are all the other options, too. I mean, there could be new prison construction. There could be increased contracting out. Those are options to comply with the three-judge panel. And so it's just a matter of how much does the state want to invest in those various options. I think that's the tough choice that you're facing.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. We have Senator Berryhill and Senator Hancock.
Yeah, I may not be quite as nice as the chairman. Basically, this system is failing. Based on the administration's own estimates, the state would have saved more than $3 billion by 2014-15 from shifting felons to local control and to realignment. That was the deal. And there would be another $1.5 billion in cost avoidances from not building more prison space. Now, obviously, they haven't met those projections. So in a nutshell, crime is up, recidivism has not changed a bit, and if we don't get some money down to our locals so we can start fixing this thing, this thing's toast. Tell me where I'm wrong in this assessment or where I'm right, or just a few comments.
Sure. I think the first thing I would point out is, as we kind of pointed out on the last page of our handout when we were discussing, what's the overall impact of realignment on the state's budget. We don't know for sure what costs were avoided. And as I pointed out, it's possible that if we didn't do realignment, the state would have had to reduce the population. The CDCR's budget could actually be lower. So I don't think we know for sure what the costs are that were actually avoided. So I think that's one thing I would just point out. But I do think that absolutely the blueprint did it was sold as a way to avoid certain costs, and it was based on the premise that we would be building prisons that would be very costly in the future. And so I think it's a reasonable conclusion that you've reached based on what the blueprint actually said.
Well, if you recall, back in the day, we passed AB 900 to build more facilities. Had we moved forward and done that, we wouldn't have been sitting in this situation today, correct? I mean, more than likely. We would have had more beds.
I think if the state built more prison capacity, then certainly that would have been one way of complying with three judge panel's order to reduce the overcrowding levels. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Berryhill. Senator Hancock.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the charts are sobering. That prison population isn't going down as much as it needs to, and that the budget isn't going down, because we really did hope that we were going to be freeing money up from the general fund to educate our kids, fix our infrastructure, and do a number of other things. But as sobering as the charts are, I could not tell from the presentation, are you counting the $1 billion plus whatever, that we're sending to counties as a cost? Because that's an additional cost to the state general fund.
So if you look at the figure on page 6, That is where we do look at the cost. The darker bars on that chart represent the amount of money that was provided to locals.
Is basically, the total county funding.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you using them in your analysis of how much money we're spending? Are they included, in other words, in the CDCR budget?
They are not, no.
Okay, so we're spending that money in addition to
Correct,
a prison
yes.
budget that's going up.
Absolutely.
Are you counting the $500 million we put into increased jail lease revenue bonds last year? And are you counting in your other projections the $500 million the governor is asking for additional lease revenue bonds for jails?
No, Senator. We only looked at the things that were included in the blueprint. So the blueprint had no assumptions about money being provided to the locals for jail construction. So we didn't include the $500 million that has been approved, nor did we include the $500 million that's proposed in the current year, the budget year.
Because that's going to be about $1 billion in increased jail space, right?
That's correct, yes.
In addition to the $900 million that we set aside in AB 900.
I believe it was $1.2 billion for jails.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought it was $900 million. So in the we have set aside not quite a bit of money for, and it would seem to me that if we're looking at the corrections budget and trying to ascertain what percentage it is of the total general fund, we ought to be looking at these things. I realize lease revenue bonds, it's only the interest and the payback that we'll be counting in any given year, but it is money that then isn't available for other things that the people of California might want. And are you also, are you counting in to the total corrections budget? You probably are, the $315 million for new contract.
Yes, we did.
And how about the Norco rehabilitation and the Stockton 600-bed facility?
So the Norco facility was not scheduled to be closed until 2015-16, so it was out of the range that we looked at. And so if we were looking at a year further down the road, we would have included an additional $160 million or so in costs, because now the Norco is not going to be closed as was initially proposed.
And then what about Stockton? There's quite a lot of money. I don't know, I can't remember if it's over $1 million or almost $1 million now for the renovation of that space.
Yeah, so that's not included in our numbers either, because we only looked at the areas where CDCR said that they would make specific reductions to their budget, and so that was not included as part of the...
Okay, thank you. That's
Sure.
very clarifying. And I would suggest to the chair, who pointed out that perhaps the blueprint isn't the most relevant document at this point, that all of these costs to the general fund ought to be included in a discussion then of the CDCR budget and how we're spending our money and the mix of rehabilitation and other things. And I would add to that, honestly, couldn't we have anticipated the MOU increases in salaries?
Well, I think it did come very shortly after the blueprint was passed, so I think it is a bit... It was a bit surprising to see the administration come forward with a proposal so soon after the blueprint passed that made it very difficult, if not impossible, for them to meet the reductions that they had set as targets in the blueprint.
Okay, all right. I'm just, we've already discussed that bad data might have been the reason for some of the projections that were off. And I just think for transparency, it's important that all of these costs be factored in when we say we're looking at the CDCR budget. So we can tell what kind of progress we're making to the big goal, which is to meet the requirements of the federal courts and reduce our population and maintain public safety always, but then also to spend less of a percentage of our budget on corrections. I've been hearing increasingly, as I talk to experts and people in the state, not only about the need for some kind of sentencing review. I think Mr. DeVore, I don't know if I should call him Assembly Member DeVore, once an Assembly Member, always, or whatever. But Mr. DeVore did talk about some of the anomalies in California sentencing that increase our population. But I've been hearing a lot about the need for a cultural shift. I've had some nonprofits tell me they won't go into our prisons. Somebody said, unless I can take over a whole prison, because the culture is such that it's very difficult to succeed in where you're trying to go. And that's made me think more over time about the training and experience that we expect from our professionals in prisons. And I have to say, most recently, around the issues of pepper spray and the increasing clarity, I guess, that we may be dealing with a very large mentally ill population in our prisons, and we may have the professional staff in our prisons not equipped to deal with those problems. And I wondered if the LAO had looked at any of those things, or we would need to ask you to look at them if we were going to try to find solutions. Again, as somebody said, we got to do the assessment, figure out what the core problem is, and then how do we fix it.
Yeah, I guess I would say that we have looked at risk assessments. We looked at the literature around that particular issue, and I think there's a very strong body of research that is in a very important part delivering effective program. You really do have to identify the right inmate to get into the right program at the right time.
Right, and so I'm just thinking we need to do that in a certain way with our prison system, which seems to be pretty generally agreed to be pretty broken. So what is the core problem? Is it the sentencing? Is it the culture? Is it the training? Is it, somebody has to give us some thoughts on that, and I wondered if the LAO had ever studied that, or if that would be something you could look at.
Yeah, I mean, we would be happy to look at it. I mean, I think what I would say is in our experience at looking at when the department attempts to implement changes to rehabilitation programs and then things like risk and needs assessment, they do face challenges, I think, because it is such a large organization. There are 33 different prisons. It can be hard to implement these large-scale initiatives across 33 prisons to get everyone moving in the same direction. I think these things take time, and we've seen a lot of turnover in leadership over the years, so I think having new leaders come in and start implementing different types of initiatives, we've seen them kind of change directions different times, and so I think those are some of the challenges they face in implementing them. I think they have people over there that are really committed to doing these things. It is really a challenge to turn a giant organization like that, I think.
Right. It's interesting because since education is what I came here to do and what I know most about in terms of institutional things, it's almost like maybe it's hard to change a 33 prison operation. Maybe we need something like charter schools where we try different things. I'm thinking we may need to dedicate some prisons to the mentally ill if the statistic that I saw the other day of 30,000 mentally ill inmates is any place close to being accurate.
Yeah, that is accurate. I think they're right about that right now. I think they're 30% of their population, so that's, I think, around 35, 36,000 or so.
So I think we're going to need some help, I think, in identifying some key things and maybe think in ways that we haven't thought we would have to. or, think outside the box, as they say, and see if we can't come up with something that's going to work better than your current statistics indicate we're doing. But thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I do have a few more questions, which I'm not going to engage with you today. I can pick up the phone and get some answers, because I'd really like to see that we can conclude the entire hearing by 4 o'clock. I know we've kept a lot of people very long. Senator Berryhill, I think you wanted to make a statement, and then we're going to ask the LAO if you could stay with us as we ask folks from PPIC and the department to come forward. Thank you.
And I do appreciate you allowing me to make a couple remarks. Mr. Chairman, I wasn't here when we first got here, but considering the different panels that have been on here, I think this is pretty relevant. And I'd just like to say that I am encouraged that the governor is turning to recognize some of the serious flaws with this realignment program. We've had some pitfalls here that we really didn't know were coming. His budget proposes limiting long-term jail sentences, does provide some new funding for jail and programming space, but more definitely needs to be done. We need improved data collection and reporting so we can monitor programs and locals can implement best practices for any given area. We must ensure adequate funding for local law enforcement to provide evidence-based, educational, vocational, and substance abuse treatment programs to reduce recidivism, which we've heard on today. Without these investments, realignment is destined to fail, as we are seeing already. Reports indicate that crime, especially crime, is on the rise for the first time in 2 decades. And I can tell you in my rural areas, with metal theft and whatnot, it's much worse. So we must reinvest in our criminal justice system or face the reality of higher crime rates and more victims of crime. The idea of handing over our state prisons to the inmate advocates through appointment of a compliance monitor that can release anyone they want, in my opinion, is absolutely absurd, and we shouldn't do it. We need a plan that allows us to rehabilitate and help those that want to become productive citizens, and also protects our neighbors from dangerous felons. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So again, thank you, Mr. Edwards, and if you can hang around, we appreciate it. So, Mr. Hoshino, if you could join us, please. I know you're on a time frame, we're on a time frame, so we'll be as succinct as possible. And we had asked you to join us today. Colleagues, I want to ask if we could focus specifically with regard to the department's presentation on the issue of population.
Certainly, Senator, members, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I do want to get to that, Senator, Mr. Chairman, but I do want to make at least a comment about...
Get a little closer to your microphone, please.
Do at least want to make a comment about the blueprint. Certainly, I think the discussion here has been appropriate about it in the context of population assumptions that we had made and also legal strategies that we had launched. But I want to remind the members, as well as the people in my department that are listening to this hearing, that there were a lot of principles in the blueprint which I think were important, that we rallied for and that we fought for. Those I do not believe are irrelevant. And I think when we have the public policy debate that is before us and coming to us, those principles should remain intact. And that the blueprint actually did a number of things. We felt that we were overclassifying inmates at too high of a level, and so we launched a reform in our classification system, and we've executed on that and we've implemented that. And so folks that we felt were at higher levels that should have been at lower levels, about 17,000 or so, have been reclassified into lower levels. We've also been able to reduce our population. We've emptied out all of our gyms. We had inmates in 125 day rooms. Those things are now available because we've made the housing changes associated with the blueprint so that we can actually provide treatment, so that we can actually do then the thing that we really want to do, which is to get to our namesake that we added in 2005 by calling ourselves the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And we made a modest reinvestment there. And we've been executing on those things. We also put the architecture together for reentry hubs. to remind folks inside the blueprint, and we're happy to report that we are about to activate the balance of those. 4 have been in operation, and probably before February is out, we will have at least the balance of the 9 institutions up and running. And at the latest, again, challenges being what they are, certainly by the end of the fiscal year, really have all of those things going. I just wanted to take a brief moment to talk about that, and thank you for indulging me.
No, thank you for the comments, and let me just say that they're points well taken, and that my own personal critical comments that you heard me make earlier were very specific relative to the blueprint, to projections of population and cost.
And I think that that's accurate. I mean, it's fair to say we did have the assumption that our population would somehow land around 141 to 142%, that this would then set the stage, we hoped, given all of the changes since 2006 forward to our system, which were the facts that were predicated in the 3-judge panel's finding of the population cap, that we would be able to make an argument. And we thought the Supreme Court had invited us in the specific language of its decision to do so. Obviously, that has now run its course, and back to where we are now, which was the topic that I was asked to prepare for. Where actually are we with respect to our population and the challenges related to that? If it's helpful to the members.
Sure. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you very much. Just in response or a follow-up question to your opening statement before you get into your presentation, I'm curious, any reduction to the secure housing unit? You mentioned a reevaluation of how you viewed inmates and how they were
Yes, thank you
managed.
for that question,
So any reduction
Senator
in the
Mitchell.
SHU?
Yes. So the blueprint, also one of the elements that I didn't mention that was in there, was actually the beginning of what we call our security threat group reform, which was to take on gang management, and alter our strategy because we felt our strategy wasn't working. We had begun the survey of the other states, looking at how they were doing things, how we were doing things. That has been in progress over the last couple of years. It's really accelerated recently. To date, we've reviewed 640 members and associates of these gangs, and we are at probably the mid 90% of those folks have been not reclassified per se, but they have been admitted to either our step-down program so that they can work their way out of the SHUs, and in fact are on their way out of the SHUs, and then a large percentage have also been released directly to our general population, so they have actually left the SHU environment. This then sets the stage to the heart of your question, was what will we do with the SHU space at the end of the day when this reform completes its cycle? But we are in the midst of that. I do appreciate that question.
We're all yours.
So if it is helpful to the members, what I thought I would do is talk about population, but also quickly stitch it to what is going on with the 3-judge court, because I think they're obviously impossible to extricate one from the other. Certainly where we are is we have all accepted that 137.5 is indeed, in fact, our population cap. While there was uncertainty for some time, that certainly is some certainty, and it certainly frames for us a hard line in the public policy debate that we're going to have, which is why the discussion of population, where we are and where it might be headed, becomes acutely important. We then rallied together as a state for SB 105 when we thought the deadline was going to be December 31st of last year. That has now been extended to April 18th. With that, the court had ordered us to engage in a meet and confer process to hopefully bring some resolution and agreement with the plaintiffs. It was mediated by an associate justice. Those discussions concluded. The reports went in on January 10th. There was no agreement, and the court asked us, as well as the plaintiffs, to turn in what would be our proposed orders in this particular area. The administration modified its assumptions for this. SB 105, members, you recall, was requesting a 3-year extension. And what we have asked for, because it became quite clear to us during the meet and confer process that was not going to happen. And so we had requested a 2-year extension. Hence, the budget proposal that's in front of you that we will be debating has an assumption of the 2 years related to it. Now, with respect to population and the trends, I have some information for you on that. Based on our projections, you will remember last fall, we thought that our gap between where we were in population and the end of the year was going to be about 8,000 to 9,000 inmates. We now project for April 18th or even if it is May, thereabouts, if the court were to extend it a little bit further, our projected gap is about 3,000 to 4,000 inmates at this time, largely owing to SB 105. We have not sent additional inmates out of state. The court had put a prohibition on that during the course of this meet and confer, but instead we tried to pace ourselves and go as slow as we could in terms of in-state capacity while we waited for this question to resolve, which then created some money that was available immediately for the Recidivism Reduction Fund, since the SB 105 had the wisdom of treating this issue or trying to solve this problem with what we could come up with the most ideal mix in terms of capacity, but also what will we do in terms of durable solutions, which we believe recidivism reduction strategies are certainly a part of. Nevertheless, there is an increase in our population, which has been cataloged to some extent by the LAO and by ourselves in our own population reports. If I were to describe for you and explain to you why we believe the population is increasing, there are a number of things, but I think it bears reminding to folks that it is actually a two-part equation, first and foremost. In other words, it's a net analysis. It is a function both of not just who is coming in prison and the rate that they are coming in prison, but it is also a function of the rate at which people are departing prison. And one of the things that might be helpful is that to illustrate this is there's an actual set of data that I can give you where we are starting to detect this issue, which is in June of 2012, in a six-month period that ended in June 2012, the monthly rate of admissions in our system was 2,847. Whereas in the six-month period ending December 2013, the monthly rate of admissions was 3,277. Conversely, the folks departing our system, during the same six-month period in June, the monthly rate of releases was approximately 4,900, whereas in the six-month period ending December 2013, the monthly rate of releases was approximately 3,000. And so I raise this point to make sure and to remind all of us that it's a function of two things. It is not just a matter of the rate that we tend to be focused on of who is actually coming in and the reasons, therefore, why. But it illustrates to us, again, one of the effects of realignment that we're learning is, of course, the population that we're left with tend to have longer sentences, and so they are not leaving traditionally at the rate that we were used to of the population that we had prior to realignment. The second thing to illustrate, which we have described already, is that the second striker population is increasing in our system. There are two ways to describe this, both as a matter of total percentage of admissions to the prison system and the year-over-year rate by which this population is coming. On the first category, as a percentage of total admissions to our system, we see that second strikers are returning to our system prior at a rate of about 13%. Now, after realignment, they make up about 25% of our admissions pie. The year-over-year number is approximately 20% in terms of increase. Now, this is important because of two reasons. It is not just this particular population, but again, it is a population that tends to stay with us longer and has a lower credit earning status. And this is why you see in some of our proposals, not just in the budget, but also to the three-judge panel, that we try to put some prescription in place for how to go about treating this particular condition. And so there are two proposals there, which folks are aware of, which is an increase in the credit earning status for that particular population, as well as the conceptual creation of a new parole process directed at nonviolent second strikers who have served approximately 50% of their sentence. In terms of the causes of why we actually think that this is happening out there, there are certainly a number of things to point to. I don't think we are ready to conclude or say that any one of these particular causes is actually a cause. There are certainly things that we can speculate are going on, again, in the short 2 years after realignment, knowing well, and I think folks have already said this, realignment, as big as it is, the size of its dimension, has not run its course yet. We still have members in our prison system still to depart who are part of the realigned crimes of 2 years ago. But certainly we had all thought that there might be changes in sentencing or changes in charging. We haven't seen the evidence yet in our review and in our analysis to conclude that that is in fact what is happening. There is also the possibility of changes in policing tactics. There could be crime patterns or factors that others have talked about. We are not ready to conclude that those are the things that are driving the change. There is one other area to speculate upon, which we had theorized at one point, that the notion that when we made the change to the parole revocation system and thereby earned the churning of the inmates coming to our system for very short stays, that this might have an effect in terms of the state local relationship of how to treat that particular population. What I mean by that is at time there were choices to be made between whether or not a prosecution should occur for a particular crime or whether or not the revocation process of the state would administratively adjudicate a parole violation and therefore bring that person to state prison. That now not being available, there's room for consideration or thought to, has a natural or unnatural effect, depending on your worldview, has a natural effect occurred, where since that is not available, does that now provide at the local level more of an onus and a burden or responsibility to deal with a criminal violation as a criminal violation, since the parole violation is not part of that. And so those were at least the observations or comments that I wanted to bring that I hope were on point for the particular subject, and certainly am available to answer any follow-up questions of any of the members of the panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoshino. Colleagues, again, being sensitive to time, maybe we can keep Mr. Hoshino about another 15 minutes, and then we'll move on to the last part of our agenda with the Public Policy Institute. Do we know of the new incoming, the increase of incoming inmates? Probably, well, if they are those who are responsible for increasing some of the crime that we're hearing about at the local level, if they are realigned offenders or if they are new offenders who were never a part of realignment?
I think it's fair to say it's a mix of both, which is why we are not ready to conclude that it's one or the other, but it is not, you know, one group over another. There is in the mix folks that have committed crimes that we have realigned.
But we are keeping track of those figures so that we'll be able to have some meaningful assessment of realignment once it is fully implemented.
I think so over time, yes. Again, I think your comments earlier were, we're not ready to conclude yet.
I stand by that.
Subject.
It's far too early. But I just want to make sure that once we have enough hindsight that we're dealing with some meaningful numbers that we can turn to.
Yes, we are following the data.
We need to know that whether these new crimes, increase in crime rates, are caused by those who are realigned or are new offenders.
Yes, and I think our department is tracking what we call offender-level data of actual folks that were realigned. And again, we'll continue to do that. My understanding is the PPIC may be doing something similar also. But again, I think time has to pass, and I know that you have Mr. Lofgren here to answer those questions also.
Right. And then in the governor's proposed budget, there is the idea to, and this is in response to a real concern that the state sheriffs have shared with us, that those who would be sentenced to county jail for 10 years or more would in fact come back to the state system rather than spend more than 10 years in a county jail cell.
Yes, that proposal is in there.
And I want to get the LAO's take on this as well. The assessment of that proposal is that it would only potentially increase your population by 300 a year. How do we determine that? It would seem to me that it could be significantly more than that, if only because it unfortunately could have the unintended consequence of having county DAs upcharge to get them off the county dime and back to the state, which is detrimental and counterproductive productive to the whole concept of realignment. Does it not have that unintended incentive, and what are we going to do about it?
There's the thinking behind that, as I understood it, is that the distance of 10 years is a distance that is greater than some of the other distances in terms of time that would bring people to prison. And when we looked at all of the various lines or lengths that you could draw, 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, and there have been other folks who have suggested, obviously, that the line be much lower. Those would have a more deleterious effect on our population, we believe. But also, it creates, it's easier of a bar, essentially, to get to, is the best way that I can describe it. And the other thing that we've said is that this conversation or this discussion of this proposal also still has to go hand in hand with the population pressures that on the department. Even though the number is 300, regardless of what the number is, any discussion or change or anything that adds population to the prison system has always got to be reconciled against the 137.5 cap.
And you're not overly concerned about the unintended consequences?
Not at this time, no.
And Mr. Edwards?